Hello, this is Neil from mypaintgirls.com. You can check out my links in the description for free tutorials on writing and on drawing or painting and everything. Right, so let's go ahead and get started then. So this video is on hard and soft edges, which somebody recommended. I thought that'd be a good subject to cover. Before I get started though, I need to show where to get these stock photos and where I'm using them from. And this is the person that I'm using the photos from, and you can read the rights, and they pretty much allow you to do anything you want with the photos. So it's like royalty free. Right, so let's go ahead and get started then. I'm going to talk a little bit about the principles that can apply universally, because I think that's the best. When you're learning artwork, I think it's the best to learn it in principles that are universal, that you can apply it to any drawing or any painting, and then you can, really understand the subject matter of hard and soft edges. So that the first principle is that basically the edges of any object are going to be the hardest. Whether it's the edges of her arm, which is here, that's basically the outline of the arm, or whether it be the outline of the edges of her shirt, and notice it doesn't matter even if that shirt comes inside, it's still going to have a hard edge. Whether it be the outline of the lips, which is like own separate object, outline of a nose where it overlaps and so forth. So the outline edges of objects are the hardest. The inside edges are the softest, and that's all the inside. So all the inside of the arm, all the inside of the chest here, inside of the hands and so forth are going to be the softest. But there's a couple other principles too. One principle is contrast. So for example, if I were to have a pipe, let's say, and this pipe is coming down like so, the hardest edge on the pipe is going to be where that you see that dark, because it's metal, where you see that dark line that comes down like so, and then you have a white line right next to it. That's the highlight. So it's where those two colors meet. You have this really dark and really light color right next to each other, and that creates a hard edge there. So you'll see this kind of thing on metal and so forth, but you can also see it on a human body. Sometimes you'll have a really hard edge because you'll have it won't be like as hard as metal, for example, because it's skin. But if you really pump up the contrast and make the shadows very dark and the light here, so let's say this was pumped up more and all this was darker, then you'd have a harder edge right here where the light and dark are meeting the more you pump that up. And in fact, you can kind of see it in this other photo right in here. So you can see where the contrast is pumped up more, so you get a darker shadow, and you get the lighter, and you get kind of a harder edge here. But there is this is more color theory, but you get a really warm color in there too, and that kind of softens out the edge. But anyway, you still get a harder edge there, as you can see. And it really depends on the material how hard the edge will be. The next thing is overlapping objects, and that's kind of the same as the edge of objects. The principle is the same pretty much. That is where you have the edge of objects, so the edge of the head isn't be hard edged, the edges of the clothing will be hard edged, but also where objects overlap, you can have hard edges. So for example, this isn't necessarily the edge of the object, but because it's overlapping, you get a hard edge. And let me see if there's other examples of that. Here's another example of that. That is kind of the edge of the object, but it's also overlapping. Let's see here. You can kind of get the nose, for example. The nose is kind of its own object too, but it's because it's overlapping. Notice this is sticking out, and so it's overlapping. It's almost like there's a pipe or another shape just stuck on a shape. Whenever you have it becomes like its own shape in itself, and it creates a hard edge here. Same thing with this here. This muscle here is kind of like its own hard edge, and because of that, because this is like its own hard edge or its own shape, it creates hard edges as well. And so you're going to get kind of a hard edge along here where the light is hitting it and the shadow are folding from light folding to dark. But notice it's not so hard. It's not like this hard. You'd still want to have some gradient. There's this color, and this color, so there's still some transition. But each of those transitions has pretty hard lines. But you wouldn't use your hardest brush. You take like a pen brush, for example, go in here, turn down the hardness to like, let's say 50 or something like that, and then you would draw those different colors. You can even use the softest soft brush, in fact, like this. Look how soft that is. Super soft brush. As you can see, the edges are very soft. But when I turn it down in size, and then I draw these these things here, like if I just come here, you can see it's actually not that hard of an edge. And you can see those edges are pretty soft. That's one way to see how soft they are, is grab that color, pull it with that soft brush, and you can see, wow, that's looks even harder than the colors are already there. And so then I'd have to even feather those out more and blend them together to make it look more real. Right, okay, so The edges of objects are hard edged where objects, overlap, like you have this kind of as like its own separate object, and because of that you have the light and dark contrast, and that gives kind of a harder edge, but they're not as hard as the edges over here. The edges over here you can actually get away with drawing, even with a really soft brush turned down small, as you can see. But they're still, they're not as hard as this, like that, for example. And you can see that, but if I just take that color and draw it there, it's not quite that hard, but you can really kind of get that kind of hard edge. Notice also the color is slightly different because it's kind of picking up some of the background and mixing with the skin color. So it's not just that skin color there. It's not that color either. It's a kind of a mix between both of them. As you can see there, kind of this grayish color, and that's the very edge of that arm there. Although on lighter sides, it's going to be a little different because this skin's so light, and that gray is not going to really mix with it as much, and so you're going to have more of a skin color there. And notice the contrast also is caused by, or hard edges are caused by difference in colors and overlapping objects as well. But sometimes you'll have a difference in color inside of an object, and you'll get that hard or soft edge. Inside clothing, so clothing is a good way to look at seams. Notice seams, anything that's like folded, the more sharp it's folded, like if it's a piece of paper and you fold it, that crease is going to cause a really hard edge because you're going to have the shadow, the dark and light shadow. But you're only going to be able to see that hard edge when you apply light to it, and the light hits it from a direction that causes the shadow to occur. Then you'll have, and the edge will appear harder or more pronounced the more contrast there is. So the darker the shadow and the lighter the light between, that really emphasizes that crease, you'll get more of definition in that crease, so it'll look sharper. That is, the edge will look harder. But notice as some of these are more rounded, they're not so creased as much, you have more of a softer, and it blends out soft this way. It's dark here and it blends out softer as it goes out that way. These are just things to keep in mind, the principles. The next thing, and another principle to remember, is when you have a cast shadow, you're going to have typically a harder edge. So let's say this here is just one object and it's round and the light's hitting it here, and so it's causing this kind of cast shadow over here a little bit. And let's say it was, really cast shadow to be like that, but that cast shadow is going to have kind of a hard edge, but still, because it's inside, it's pretty soft. But if it's the right object, like the object itself, this is more round, right, up here, and so it's not going to cause such a hard cast shadow. But let's say you had like a cube, oops, and let's say this cube was just sitting on her body like this, and let's say it was like this, right, and the light's hitting it, then you would actually have a pretty hard edge shadow down here. And it would get softer the further away from the object it is. So the further away from the object, all these lines would get softer, but the edges right next to it would be pretty dang hard. So, and that again has to do with contrast, but it depends on how the light's hitting it. You can get a pretty darn, how close the object is to the ground or to the other object. If it's sitting right on it, you're going to get pretty hard edges right here. If it's hovering above her, the edges will be more soft. So just keep that in mind. These are principles, again, you can apply to anything. And they're principles you just have to memorize, and the best way to memorize them is by practicing them over and over again. You can see the edges within the finger here are rather soft, and so you can actually get away with drawing a face, for example, with all soft edges, a really soft brush, painting in all these shapes with soft brush, and then only using hard edges around the nose, the eyes, the lips, and then you'll be like, wow, that actually looks like a face. And I actually have a face tutorial, a painting face tutorial, where I show just that happening. Right, so let's go ahead and do a quick demonstration then of using these principles, and we'll do it on her leg. So the first thing we need to do is we need to outline with the colors. So you can see the outline of this leg is pretty much that color, and then the hard edge is only caused by the difference of overlapping objects. And so you have this object overlapping this object. This is the edge of the object overlapping that object. And so this object has a little bit of shadow, this one has light, and it's the difference between the shadow on this leg and the light on this leg that causes that hard edge. But it's only appears so hard because it is the edge of the leg. So I'm going to draw with that color, like so, and just draw the edge. I'm doing this on a separate layer. And this side I'm going to grab that dark shadow. And I'm not going for perfection here because I don't have much time, so I'm just going to quickly show the principles in play here. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab It doesn't really matter what color, it can be pink, whatever. I'm just going to kind of trace the main shape here of the shadow, like so. I'm not worried about really any inner shadows, and actually I'm going to go ahead and trace that too. Within the shadows, that is, inner highlights within the shadow, I'm not going to be worried about that so much. I'm not going to worry about that shape right there even right now, just the dark shapes right there. Okay, once I have the dark shapes, then I'm going to make a layer underneath that layer. I'm going to change it to a color that I know I usually color with. I'm going to grab that dark shadow color, and now I'm going to begin to paint in that color. I'm going to paint it in with a soft brush. I'm not worried about going outside the lines there, because I'm going to fix that by erasing it. I do want to, trace the edge of this fairly well. I'll go in and also erase it with a eraser, a soft eraser. Right, so like that. Now I'm going to take a soft eraser that's a little bit smaller, and I'm going to go through and just kind of erase around the edges here, maybe even smaller than that. Notice that even though this is a super soft brush, I can get rather hard edges with it by just making the brush smaller and smaller. And so let's go ahead and get those edges like that. I'm going to turn this layer down a little bit just so I can see the lines on this side. And actually, I'm not even going to worry about erasing it. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is to make them a little bit softer, I'm going to add a Gaussian blur. So I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian blur. I can also do this by hand, but this is just a quick trick you can do. And just add a little bit more softer edges, like so. Now I'm going to go through with the eraser and erase to get that hard edge back on the leg. I kind of colored in too far there, or erased too far on that edge. That's fine. I can go back in and fix that if I need to. Make sure all that is, oops. Oh, I'm using the freaking wrong tool. No wonder. Like so. Right, so you start to get this kind of, definition within the leg. And this side over here is probably going to have the hardest edge. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that all in. Okay, now I can go ahead and get rid of the, that's all the line work together. So I meant to put the color lines on its own separate layer. But that's fine, I'll go ahead and just erase those color lines since they're inside anyway. Okay, the next thing I need to do then is make a base color. I need to grab a medium base color here within the leg and then fill that in real fast. And I'm just going to use a hard edge brush for this. That way I don't have to erase. I'll just kind of follow the edges best I can here really fast. Again, I'm working for speed here because I'm running out of time. And that's the base color. That's part of the leg. And voila. Now, once you have this principle down, the hard and soft edges, with the rules down, you can start to understand how they work, and you know that a lot of this here is going to be quite soft. And so like that, and then you go back to the photo reference, and you would see, okay, well, there is other colors in here. Oops, wrong layer. There are other highlights that come in and hit this knee a little bit, and this is from a secondary light, and it just, so once first you go and I have these painting principles I teach you. You paint the hard shadows, and then you come back in and you paint some whatever color is the splash light that's hitting it. In this case, it's just their skin color, and go back in and you kind of add highlights to the shadows. And you add a little bit like that, and then you would grab this color and make it lighter, and this is where you add the highlights in. And I don't know how light the highlights are going to be, but let's say like this, and let's say there's going to be a highlight here, and again, this is all soft edges because it's on the inside of the body, so like so. And so you use a soft brush. So you can see then where the hardest edges and softest edges would be with an image when you apply these principles, and hopefully that'll help. I did that very quickly, I know, and it's also out of context, so it's going to look kind of funny, but as you can see, if I just overlap it completely over the picture, you can see that you kind of get that cool. Because notice it's all solid and filled in. Thank you for watching. Appreciate it.